Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the PetaPixel podcast. I'm Jaron Schneider. I am joined by Chris Nichols and Jordan Drake. Eventually, I'm going to say as always, but I feel like we need at least 3 episodes before I can say as always. But this week we have, it started out as a relatively short list of things we were going to talk about, and it just ballooned into a relatively large show yet again. But this week we're going to talk about an accessory that is going on crowdfunding called the Stockcam. Speaking of crowdfunding, we're going to talk about a new software suite called Abode, not to be confused with Adobe. Yesterday, the M2 Ultra reviews were published, including ours, and that thing is shredding through photo and video edits. And then the last thing we're going to talk about as far as news goes is the 18K Big Sky camera, which is insane. But the main topic today is how everything you guys know about PetaPixel is a lie. All right, gentlemen, so let's get started with the reason we're allowed to be here today. And that is thanks to OM Digital, our sponsor. We would like to thank our sponsor, OM System. Once again, this podcast wouldn't be possible without their support. So we really want to give them a huge thanks. Last week, we went off script and talked about the crazy stress tests that the OM System puts all their cameras through in order to make sure that they can survive some of the world's harshest environments. The incredibly compact and feature-rich OM5 has gone through these same stress tests. And OM System Ambassador Frank Smith recently put the camera to the test to capture one of the harshest yet most photogenic locations in the world, Patagonia. And I'm going to show you guys some Patagonia because these are some sweet photos.
I want to go there so bad.
To Patagonia?
To fish, of course, not to take photos. I mean, come on.
God, jeez.
Both. Maybe both.
Anyone listening to this podcast, they can go to PetaPixel.com. I'll put a link in the show description to where you can actually, the actual link to these pictures. But he went to Patagonia to photograph the fall colors of the region using the OM5. And he specifically used the high-res shot mode so that he could get these like really big 50 to 80 megapixel photos. That are, I hear a lot about people who don't shoot with Micro Four Thirds that they don't like, that the resolution's not high enough. So this is basically the answer to that. And these photos are sick. So
yeah, beautiful stuff. And they really improved their ability to handle motion when doing the multi-shot, which I really like. So that's it's even more effective than it used to be. And the fact that you can even do it handheld is pretty cool.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell that these were multi-shot photos just looking at them. They just look like sweet landscape pictures. So that's awesome. So make sure to check out the link in the description or visit PetaPixel.com to read about Frank's expedition to Patagonia and see all of his incredible photos. To learn more about the OM5 and OM System incredible line of M.Zuiko lenses, visit explore.omsystem.com. All right. Let's talk about this last week in photography, and I want to start with the Stockcam. So for anyone who is unaware of this, let me give you a brief description. It is a new gun-shaped camera cage designed for photographers who love shooting of all kinds. And the pictures, I have to give that to Jeremy Gray, one of our writers who wrote that intro there. That is extremely apt. The pictures of this thing are absurd.
It's the first impression was like, is it real? I remember it popping up in the Twitter feed and stuff, and I'm like, okay, is this just like The Onion? Is this a joke? What's going on? But looks like it's fairly serious. It's not revolutionary. I mean, Zenit did this before with the Photo Sniper. Yeah. Other companies have tried that too, and so I don't know. Even considering how much I should enjoy the subject matter, I don't want to buy one. I don't think.
I look forward to seeing it in the news. That's the best advertising you can possibly get, right? Is just like another person using the photo. What's it?
It's called the Stockcam. You get it because it's
the stock.
It's like a gun stock.
Right. Yeah. has been shot by accident again today. So that's great.
Yeah, that'll.
This thing doesn't. This thing, like I think what puts it over the top for me. There's a one specific photo, and the guy who's like modeling it is wearing like cosplay tactical gear, including a Rockstar Studios video game patch for some reason that I can't quite understand.
Jaron, he's a straight up true operator. Do not slight this man. Look at him.
He's holding it with like actual trigger discipline in this photo too, where he's got his finger is like across the trigger, not on it, so he's serious.
Yeah, you do not point anything like that at anything you do not intend to destroy or take a photograph of. It's very important. Safety first, always.
As an American, I'm like, this is incredibly American, and I can't. I don't know. This is so dangerous. I mean,
first off, I don't know. I feel like if the whole gun stock thing was really an important stability tool for long telephoto lenses, it'd be far more prevalent. I've never thought that it was really that useful to stabilize. But on top of that, I'm going to geek out here a bit, but I mean, what really gets me is actually how much like a modern military gun stock they made this thing. It's got 20 millimeter Picatinny rails. You could put a flashlight on it. You could put a scope on it. I mean, there's no point doing that, but you could totally co-witness this thing. And at the same time, like it's got a selector switch on it, sort of like select fire switch, AR-15 style. Like, I don't know, man.
You know a terrifying amount about this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I mean, and I love all that stuff in the context of, its proper usage. But here, it's going to be very popular at like political photo opportunities for sure.
It's so irresponsible. I mean, and I'm just thinking right now, I'm picturing in my mind Jordan shooting a video of you while equipped with this
will never happen
in public. Like that's never going to happen. Exactly. Who in their right mind would try this? It just seems so crazy. I can't express to you how foolish this seems to me.
I know there's probably like a bit of a language thing going on, but like the whole thing of like it adds ritual to the whole experience I found fascinating. And I also love that like all the sample photos, the guy's not using like a 400-2.8. He's using like a 24-120 or like a 70-2. I mean, like stuff that you would never need any sort of stability support, shoulder mounted anything. Anyways,
I like that it can fit on a tripod if you're so inclined. Like you can just go ahead and set that on a tripod and use that entire. I mean, okay, no,
I'm totally gonna buy one, but I'm gonna like mount a barreled action into it. And I'm gonna go target shoot. I'm not gonna use it for photography.
Jeez. All right. I mean, I thought I'm just moving on.
It bears discussion, but it's stupid.
It's thank you.
It's adorable.
Thank you.
I thought it would be April 1st.
Stop defending it.
All right. Well, on the list of other things that I wanted to talk about today of weird, this happens to be the second crowdfunding product that we're going to talk about, and the only reason we're going to talk about this is because it's a crowdfunding product. Last week, a British artist named Stuart Semple, and he's also the guy who's got like, I think he's responsible for like the blackest black material. He got into a tiff with someone who created Vanta Black. Basically, he created the pinkest pink instead, and instead the guy who created Vanta Black is the only person in the world who's not allowed to use it. This guy decided that he wanted to. It reads like a parody. He has organized a quote amazingly passionate team of geeks to attack quote corporate overlords, and that overlord is Adobe and their software. So what he's projected to do is create a suite of apps to compete with Adobe called Abode, and the logo is a straight ripoff of Adobe's logo, with a house in the middle instead of just like the bottom of the A in the red. And so
I think he wants litigation with corporate overlords is his real modus operandi here. I want to know, is it Abode or is it Abode? Like
I think it's Abode.
It should be Abode, right? Like, isn't that the whole point?
Here's the issue. So one of the things that I normally would keep this for the don't read the comment section, but I do want to bring it up here. One of the comments on PetaPixel said, "How can you publish this absolute nonsense?" And he's not wrong. This does seem very nonsensical. It should be obvious to anyone that one can't build a reasonably functional software package with 50,000 British pounds, which is what he was asking for.
Kickstarter, yeah.
They will need more than that to defend themselves from an incoming lawsuit from Adobe, which they will clearly lose. If they have any actual commercial ambitions. At best, it's a costly parody, and at worst, it's a straight-up scam. He's not incorrect, really, about any of this.
Right.
But he's asking, like, why would we even publish information about this? As if it's like, rather than tell people that it exists, we should pretend it doesn't exist, and that nobody knows.
You got to educate people, especially because it could very well be much like a scam, right? I mean, informing people so that they don't go ahead and look at it in a serious manner is probably more effective than just ignoring it.
Well, and this is going to come up when people search for Adobe alternatives, especially if they're looking for like no subscription Adobe alternatives, this is going to show up in a search. So yeah, I think you have to give people some information about him, let them know like the backstory of this fascinating guy that I'm looking forward to a Netflix miniseries about in 5 years.
So apparently this commenter's problem with us is that we did not specifically say it was a scam or absurd. And I do want to address, this is a news story on a news site. Publishing that type of take is an opinion. And opinion stories are not the same as news stories. And if we are going to say something opinionated, which I'd like to point out we're doing right now, it needs to be in an opinion context.
Yeah.
So for us to say this is a scam, in that is not only putting us at risk legally, because we can't prove it's a scam. We can only say it appears as though it is one if we are doing it from a news perspective. Editorially, opinion-wise, I don't even actually think I would say this is a scam, because he seems serious. It's just very risky. I'd like to point out that at the time that we're recording this, he has raised $143,000 to do this. That's where I have some concerns, because if this was just like a funny parody take, that's one thing. But he's accepting actual money from people for this.
Yeah.
Is there another example of like spite software development? This is the only
serious
spite software development? I can't think of it.
I can't think of one either. So we're crossing a new threshold here. Sorry, Chris.
It would make sense if he's trying to make an artistic statement, right? Against the establishment. But yeah, then it's very disconcerting that he's taking people's money to do that. I'm all for like democratic crowdfunding software. I remember a time when Photoshop was out, but it was early, and you had all these other companies making their own little private tools and editing stuff. And that was really interesting. And some of the tools are actually pretty useful. I know now we live in a more monopolized situation, but if it's an artistic statement, is he going to give the money back? Is he going to let people in on the joke? I don't know.
I don't even know how Kickstarter is allowing this, to be honest with you. Like, this should have been flagged as a possible issue by Kickstarter's like moderation team. But maybe they're just basically like, hey man, you're on your own legally here. We'll take our pound of flesh, our percentage of
totally.
This. And then I don't know. It just
wash your hands
so
of it.
wrong.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why we covered it, Thomas G on PetaPixel, because it's important to talk about things, not ignore them. So
exactly.
All right, moving past Kickstarter campaigns, let's talk about two really interesting pieces of technology that were both published yesterday, actually. And the first we're going to do is the M2 Ultra, which we were allowed to publish our review on yesterday morning. And I used to really hate benchmarking computers because it would take forever. So the way we benchmark Lightroom in particular is we do imports and exports 3 times after clearing the cache of the software. So like if we import something, we have to clear the cache, and then import again after like restarting the computer so that there's no chance that it'll mess with the numbers. There was a time when each of those things, like an import or an export, would take 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. That was a brutally long process. The M2 Ultra Mac Studio imported in 1 minute and 11 seconds our 110 61 megapixel Sony A7R IV files. And it took it 2 minutes and 19 seconds to do that with 100 megapixel phase 1 files.
Wow.
I was able to run this benchmark in like an hour because I was just like, it was so fast.
What kind of frame rates did you get in Crisis?
Can it run Crisis? Oh man, that's a classic meme.
Can it?
I don't think so because it hasn't been
Oh.
redone in metal. You have to like gaming on these things is I think the real blind spot on Macs right now. But I think Apple is trying to address it. But like, I would just like to talk to you specifically, Jordan, about the editing benchmark numbers here. This thing looks insanely good.
Yeah, and everything that you were saying from Apple Park when you were there at the launch, like, you know, those multiple streams of 8K, 4K with, you know, some layers stacked on top of editing adjustments. And that's a real practical workflow, not something I do constantly, but, you know, looking at the Z8 video, that was certainly something I was doing. And I was feeling the strain on my M1 Pro, which previously hasn't broken a sweat. But I mean, here we're looking at, you know, you could be doing that with like super demanding formats like Canon Raw Light and stuff like that really are very demanding on your GPU and processor. And yeah, I always say I don't care about exporting benchmarks. Like, it's a great way to compare systems, but practically it doesn't impact me. The big jump when Apple went to Apple Silicon is just everything felt more responsive. You know, I'm not getting a beach ball when I drop a new layer on or make an image sequence, which is something I do constantly in our show. You know, my running tests, that's a time lapse, basically. It's just a whole bunch of photos on a timeline. So I love seeing this. It just means when you're actually working on those projects, it's going to be, you know, very snappy, even if you're doing insanely high level 8K stuff. I mean, we'll get to it on the next story, but 18K stuff, baby.
Yeah. So for those listening, and if you haven't read our review, the way that we do our benchmarking for video is with Premiere, because Premiere is the only video editing application that we have a benchmark tool for that is also available on both PC and Mac. I can't really benchmark Final Cut because I have nothing to compare it to except other Macs, and that's not necessarily fair to someone who's trying to look at what's the best option for them, period. Yeah. Speaking to a Mac user in Jordan and a PC user in Chris, you do want to be able to provide some better options, which is why I have two PCs in there running very high-end specifications. And speaking specifically to Final Cut, what Jordan was saying is I watched 9 streams of 4K or 8K footage. It was a mix of both. They had multiple cameras, and they were all on one timeline, playing simultaneously at full resolution in an edit. So you could sit there and switch cameras live as you wanted to and never miss a beat. And then it was able to export that, which you don't care about, Jordan, that much, but I think it's still a neat
still
thing.
Great way to compare.
If you've got 2 minutes of 8K and 4K footage, which we did, and he exported and I watched it, it took it less than 30 seconds to export a final 4K edit of a 2-minute video from 4K and 8K, which it was taking, I think, from ProRes and then exporting it into a standard codec. I think it was H.264.
So when you're doing your Premiere tests, because I know that is a little bit less optimized, you know, how did this compare to, you mentioned like, you know, an absolute banging PC with a bunch of letters and numbers after it on all the things in it. How did this compare to that?
It was way better. So here's what's also somewhat frustrating. Puget Bench, which is what we use for Premiere, changed their benchmark software last month. So all of our previous bench data that I had for a bunch of computers, I had like 8 or 9 computers that we had benched. I had to toss it because even their overall score no longer works. And one of the things they removed, which I thought was really, they're trying to work on a new way to do it, but it's really sad that it's not there, is the live playback benchmark. They don't have that anymore. So you can't really tell how well it's doing at that thing I just mentioned was really cool. But it does test the long op export and an intraframe export, as well as how well it handles raw footage. And the only thing that the Mac Studio didn't do better was in the raw score. The Intel NUC 13, which has a 3080, maybe it was a 3060, one of those Ti, and an Intel 13900K, performs slightly better in raw processing. But both the other two categories, and both the last year's Mac Studio and a really like pimped out laptop, both could not compete with the intraframe and long up scores, which the intraframe in particular was really impressive on the Mac Studio, which
You
I
know
think
what-
is more important because I don't shoot in long GOP. It's always intraframe.
Yeah, I think one of the great things is you wrote a review, and everybody can go and actually check out those benchmark numbers, because I think that's probably the best way as opposed to reciting them. But I mean, irregardless, it's cool to see Macs, ever
Actually
since they
performing
switched
again.
to silicon. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like these are performance machines.
Yeah, it's really nice to see that again. Any final thoughts, Chris? Do you want one?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess my only question really, and it's kind of what Jordan was saying, is as a PC user, what is the future going to be like? At a similar price, can you get similar performance
Yeah.
out of a PC
You
computer?
absolutely can. It's going to be bigger, louder, and hotter though. That's
Right.
the trade-off. So like someone said was like, I'm comparing a like $3,800 Intel NUC Extreme, which is not actually true because you do have to put more stuff in there. So it comes
Yeah.
out a little bit more expensive than that. But it is like half the price. But it's way louder, it's bigger, it's heavier, and it produces way more heat.
Right.
When I was benchmarking this, I couldn't even hear the Mac Studio. Like it made no noise.
But you can play sweet first-person shooters from the early 2000s on it. So
Yes,
yeah.
you can play Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I believe. That's like one we've been able
wow.
to play for years now. Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
So there's reasons
have
to get
one.
a PC.
Yeah, I know who wins. I know what I'd go for. All right.
All right. Last story I want to talk about is the Big Sky camera, which was
Yes.
which was just announced as a thing yesterday. And we actually sent one of our writers, his name's David Crew, to their basically. So let me back up a little bit. The Big Sky camera is an 18K square format, gigantic resolution camera, and it's being used specifically to create content for what is known as the Sphere. In Las Vegas, there is a half circle. It's not really a full sphere, but it, spherical, gigantic building that's going up near the Venetian, and it is a theater. It's kind of like the idea of IMAX, but bigger. In order to shoot content for this, they had to custom build a camera, which they did, and they have a test sphere in Los Angeles, and that's where David went, and he got to see the camera, he got to see what it produced, and talk to the developers about the fact that they wanted to originally do like an array of red cameras, I think. And they're like, this isn't enough. So they made a gigantic camera of their own instead. And on PetaPixel, you can see a picture of it side by side. And it looks as though you can fit the entire Sony Alpha series cameras inside of just the sensor of this camera.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely mammoth. And it's cool. The camera unit itself is quite compact. If you read a little further into it, you'll see you're going to need a lot of guts attached. It really reminds me of the early, like the DCI 2K or the SI 2Ks, the early cinema cameras, which was just like a lens and a sensor that went into a backpack with all of the other hardware. This is going to be a very similar idea because 18K raw is an absolutely massive amount of data, but I do think it's really smart.
Where does the dry ice go?
So apparently they have their cooling system is a chimney. I'm going to use their word, that it actually vents the heat fast enough to not cause an issue.
Except for anybody standing above the chimney, their face
it just burns it right off. So the sensor itself is 316 megapixels, 3-inch by 3-inch HDR image sensor. That is a 40-time resolution bump over existing 4K cameras. And the thing is, it doesn't just shoot regular video. It'll do 10-bit at 120 frames per second and 12-bit at 60 in this full. You can't even say full frame. It's not even medium format. It's completely something else. And as far as from a technology standpoint, this thing is bananas. I don't know if you guys actually saw it, but I'm going to ask you, how long do you think you can record on this before you fill a 32 terabyte?
Yeah, I believe
SSD.
It was 11 minutes. Is that right, Jaron?
17
I'm going off
minutes.
memory. 17.
Yeah.
Okay.
17 minutes and for 32 terabytes.
Yeah, it's like the 35 millimeter days. It's an homage to the old creators. It's beautiful. So I guess the thing is, so Square Sensor is interesting. I'm assuming it's shooting open gate, right? I mean, are you actually utilizing all those megapixels
Yeah, because it's attaching like a big spherical lens to it. That's what's cool.
Right.
So when you're in the sphere, which they should really call the upside down teacup or something like that.
Yes, that's so much more catchy than the sphere. But
Have your marketing team get in touch with me. I got more ideas.
Teacup photography.
Yeah. You're getting that super wide field of view, and they even have something that's wider than the area that the sensor can capture, so you can do some stabilization in post, which I found quite interesting as well. The other thing is, I mean, because it can do 12-bit at 60p, we also have an idea of the readout speed on this sensor, which is okay, but not fantastic. So
Yeah.
I do worry when they're talking about, like, controlling vibration and things like that. It's probably going to take some work in post. I see this being used so much for what IMAX was previously used for, like adventure filmmaking, things like that. That could potentially be the one limitation that popped out to me, besides the massive amount of storage that you're going to go through.
I do think, to put in perspective what people can expect this thing to capture, they do want to send it underwater. I do believe they already have. And they had the precursor to this camera sent to the ISS already, and they're going to send this one to the ISS. So they're going to get like Earth in 18K from the ISS, which is going to look so cool. So like when I first saw the sphere, I was like, this seems just kind of gimmicky. Mm-hmm. Then they showed the camera. Now I'm in. I'm all in on this. Like, I need to see what this looks like. And it's going to be so hard to translate. Even if we went in there and we got to see it, like, how do you translate to someone who's not actually in there what that really looks like? You kind of have to go.
I think it's kind of funny that we're having back-to-back weeks, because we had the Vision Pro last week, where it's like, it could be cool, but we have no way of conveying to you if it's cool, or we're just going to come back and be like, it was cool or it wasn't cool. It's really, it's also experiential. But I mean, I want to check that out.
Yeah, David saw what it looks like. He sat in there and looked at a film shot, and he couldn't take any footage of it, obviously, because it's still pre-production. But like, he's like, this is insane. But he had no way other than saying this is crazy to me to convey how that was. Like, it's just like, you can't put it in words. It's hard.
And I'm sure David's very jaded, so that says something.
He has worked in filmmaking for more than a decade, so he's seen a lot of like the high-end production stuff. He's worked on sets and stuff. So yes, he is very difficult to impress. And he called me on the way out of there, like almost shaking how cool this was. So cool. That should put in perspective how neat it is.
Let's go, Chris.
Or it was brain damage from just the amount of detail
just
going
so much, so many megapixels hitting his corneas. Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's kind of a style where you're laying back, you're looking up, and it almost covers your peripheral vision. Is that the idea?
From what I can see in renderings, you're not even fully like leaning back. It's more like a regular. It's slightly leaned back, but theater's like going to the movie. But it's a really big amphitheater. And essentially, wherever you're seated, you can see the entire screen projected onto the ceiling. Yeah, it is a really neat idea.
I mean, it seems like an interesting proof of concept to see what we do going forward. And I guess the question is, what's going to win out? Do you think like VR is going to keep going and win out, or do you think this is going to win out for regular theater usage?
I think they'll exist in a separate space. Would be my inclination. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just like, VR gives you that same immersive thing. They tried it a little bit for filmmaking, didn't seem to take very well.
3D in general.
Really...
I don't know. I mean, Avatar 2 just became like the second highest grossing movie in history. So there is an appetite for it if it's done.
Did you have to see it in 3D?
I don't think there was a non-3D. I know you could see it in HFR or not, but I think the majority of people consumed it that way. Huh. But also, I mean, the thing is, as a filmmaker, if you're looking to tell stories, this is going to be great for putting you in an environment, something like that. But the concept of like a close-up or something is going to look incredibly weird in this, or just completely take you out of it. So it's all going to be wide, spherical, you are in the environment kind of filmmaking, much like, VR was.
David said he did see like a person, and like the level of detail on their face was a lot. Like, you could see capillaries. So it can be overwhelming. Like, too much detail is a thing. Like, I remember when 4K first came out, I'm like, I don't need to see this much sweat on these guys.
Yeah,
but I got used to it. So I see the sweat all the time now, and it doesn't bother me that much. So maybe I'll get used to seeing individual blood vessels.
The one thing that's really interesting is there was that push for VR filmmaking. I remember like Lubezki and Quaron made a VR film that I always really wanted to see. But the problem was it was like, individual people in a space for that, where this is something where it can be a big experiential thing, hundreds of people into there. So that has a better chance of taking off in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I brought it up, right? Is because that was an interesting experience that didn't really take off.
And I think the location of Las Vegas is a really smart pick. That's where you can get people who are like, ooh, what's that? And they'll just go in. And there's a constant stream of people doing that, I think.
But at the same time now, we've got this push for smaller headsets, right? I mean, we've seen it with the Apple Vision. So it's like, which one's going to take off first? There would just be a bunch of people sitting in a room. Well, you don't even have to sit with other people, right? You could just like put on your headset and watch this amazing experience in a full immersive.
You're not wrong. I think it would be cool to see. I'd like to see how this translates to the big screen and then see if it is possible to put it in VR on a Vision Pro. But like this... Yeah. I guarantee you this is more approachable than the current Apple Vision Pro is.
Yes, absolutely.
So much easier to go see. You could fly, stay at a hotel, go see this, and fly home if you live in the United States for less than the cost of a Vision Pro.
If you don't have a gambling problem. If you do, this could be much more expensive.
Unless you do very well at the tables, then you could go multiple times to the theater.
See, it's that way of looking at it that could be a problem, Chris.
I'm assuming it's going to be stupid expensive
to see this. I don't know. I have no idea. They haven't said. We'll find out. I think this opens in September, so we will know this year.
Oh,
I'm sure.
Big Sky. Are they going to do like what like Red did the whole thing where they name their cameras after monsters and stuff? So are these guys going to name their cameras in the future after clouds, weather formations? What's their sort of shtick going to be for naming?
I don't know why you're asking me. I don't know.
Because you're an expert.
I only know what they've told me, and they have one camera, and it's called the Big Sky.
It's those kind of exciting questions that you can ask them when we actually get a chance to.
That's why That's why you should subscribe. Subscribe right now so you don't miss in the future our podcast about
that kind of hard-hitting question.
That's right.
The new Big Sky Cumulus camera. Right? Yeah.
You know what? I don't hate that. But moving on, main story today is everything you know about PetaPixel is a lie. And the impetus for this story was when you guys joined us, not a small number of comments were not happy that you came to us. They were happy that you were doing something, but we're saying that we are just a clickbait farm. We don't do anything like real reviews. We don't feature photographers in a meaningful way. And I legitimately saw a comment that said, PetaPixel doesn't pay attention to photographers. And I was just like, what? So there are two sections to this. So first, I just want to try and be clear here about how PetaPixel does its coverage to maybe help people understand something. So the first thing I want to address is the clickbait thing. For one, nothing we do is actually the definition of clickbait. I do want to be clear that that is used incorrectly a lot. Clickbait is saying a title and having something completely different on the inside. That's what you will see at the bottom of like an ESPN story in those auto-generated of articles where it has a really grabby picture and a really grabby headline. And when you click it, it is not what you like. The picture in the headline is like not there at all.
You will not believe this wardrobe malfunction! Yeah. Exclamation mark.
That is clickbait.
When you click on our stuff, it's my face on there, sadly.
Yeah.
Not a more attractive, much younger person. You're like, oh, I want to see that.
I don't even clean up.
I show up
at all.
Yeah.
It's you as you are.
Yeah. It's me with like black hair, like just for men. And then when you click on it, it's just like, what? What's all that great? What's going on? Salt and pepper. That's not what I wanted in my food.
I want my click back.
I think what people call clickbait are stories that they aren't interested in, basically. And so from a perspective of a publication, we have two audiences that we need to cater to. We have the readers that come every day. And we actually have two writers who specifically focus on stuff photographers and videographers are interested in. Those stories almost never do as well as the ones we write that are general interest that come up in like reader feeds, in Google, stuff like that, where we're getting funneled content or funneled traffic from other sources. But we never lean heavy in one way or the other, except I could argue we do more of the stuff that generates fewer clicks than the stuff that does the most clicks. And we do this because we want to be able to have people like you provide really good information. And none of this is free. None of what we do is free. We rely on people reading the site in order to fund cool projects. So people who are upset at us for doing the thing that allows us to keep going when other websites can't is very frustrating for me as the editor of the publication, because I'm trying so hard.
And I think there's a lot of gatekeeping with it too, because when people say it's not photography centric, they mean it's not, leaning hard on the gear or advanced photographic techniques. Where when people are getting excited about photography, I think something like, hey, look, someone captured a cool moment. They were there at the right place at the right time. That's what gets people excited about it. So I think you do have to have both. I mean, how are we supposed to grow this community if we make it utterly inapproachable for people?
It's
totally.
So like the stuff that the hardcore readers are into is just the smallest niche of the percentage of people who are generally interested in photography. And it's hard, you can't just cater to that small niche and expect to grow a business and expect to be like capable of providing the good coverage so that you can pay the talented people to do the stuff that they're talented at.
I want to see the fishing rod, and then I want to see the fish that they caught with that fishing rod. And yes, I'm going to make fishing references to every single podcast episode from here on out.
For those
Jordan
that
looks
can't-
happy. Look, if this is why you need to subscribe to YouTube, because now you can see Jordan's face right
for those
now.
of you who are only listening to this podcast, this is the face Jordan makes. Like, it's actually pretty good that he makes the exact same face every time that Chris mentions.
Yeah,
fishing.
I've seen that face. It haunts me.
This is what
just
happens
came
when
back
my
from-
brain just shuts down and we go into
He just came back
standby
from
mode.
a week of fishing. I mean, he should be totally jazzed. Oh man.
Oh, that's right. We were going to talk about that. We'll do that at the end of the show instead of the beginning.
Yeah.
Next time we'll do it at the beginning. But we are going to do a thing like, what are we doing? The second part of this note that I wanted to mention is that we never feature photographers. That one really hurt, because it's like, then you clearly aren't reading the site. We have an entire section called Spotlight that we are filling with 10 to 12 stories a week minimum, where we're just watching someone do something cool with a photo. That's the entire point. We feature good work, and we're the only ones who regularly do this at this scale.
Yeah, I have to say, like, looking at the feeds, now that we work for PetaPixel and like searching that stuff up, I actually get a lot of stories from you guys unsolicited that are about the photography. And they're really interesting. Like Jordan said, you kind of have to know what's going on, why people are doing this, how they're using this stuff, what kind of moments they're capturing. I find that stuff way more fascinating than just the gear. So I was surprised actually how much that comes up.
I really want to mention when we were on our trip for the Z8, there was a photographer, Christy Odom, there who was like, I've done this really cool stuff and I have no way to showcase it. And Jaron kind of jumped on that immediately as like, oh, well, that's, an interesting photography topic.
Yeah.
Let's get that on. And I think it was on the site the next day or 2 days later.
2 days later.
Well, she got some cool shots of tadpoles and stuff. And she's like, I don't know, who wants to see tadpoles? And Jaron's like, I want to see tadpoles.
Yeah, show me the
Send
tadpoles.
me tadpoles.
Yeah, I want to talk about this sort of stuff.
I'll
And
put
then
them up tomorrow if you send them to me. Yeah, and you totally did.
someone else that she works with did photos of like a tarantula migration, and I was like, yes, send me the tarantula pictures.
Yeah.
And I published those that day too. Like, we want cool stuff. So if you're doing cool stuff with your camera, send it to us. We have a tip line. We read that every day. Like, I want to feature your work. But to say that we're not doing that it actually hurt. It hurt because we try so hard to make sure that we actually show doing cool things with pictures is more important to us than really anything else.
Yeah.
We like the gear, but we want to see what you're doing with it. Anyway, that was me being sad.
Stop hurting Jaron. What's our next comment?
So the other thing that I saw, which was I kind of laughed, and I want you guys to talk about this. When you guys moved over to us, and the one video that I got the most, we saw that got the most comments on was, Jordan, your comparison of that Sony camera and the Panasonic one.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most pervasive comments was, we told you that you needed to not pick a winner. So I want you to talk to you about how we as a business, as a publication, manage video conceptualizations. Then I want you to talk about your editorial freedom and explain how this works.
Yeah,
Because no one's going to believe me. They might not even believe you because I'm here, but go ahead.
First of all, I didn't declare a winner in one category out of 9 categories on that comparison between the Sony and the Panasonic. Image quality, which I think is completely justified. But I pitch to you primarily, Jaron, and obviously to Chris too, what we want to talk about. Then you didn't see which categories things were going to win in, what our final consensus was going to be until I send a rough edit over. And this is, very similar to how we've always worked before. Like if you're concerned that things have suddenly changed, no, this is the same process that we had before.
Did I give you a brief ahead of time?
Yeah.
Did I say, make sure you're nice to both companies, Jordan?
Yeah, exactly.
This might sound trite, but we honestly, Jordan and I don't have time to formulate some sort of nefarious agenda behind our videos. I mean, we only have time to get the facts. How are we going to say this? What are our findings? And then we talk about it. Like, we don't have the energy to then try to manipulate in the background like some sort of Illuminati, or like who's going to be, which company is going to like us today, which company are we going to work for? And like, come on. It's too much.
It's really difficult in that example too, because I was frustrated with the ZV-E1. I filmed an episode with it and I was like, I can't wait to get back to my Panasonic. But there's a huge audience out there for whom the ZV-E1 is the better camera. And we're not doing our jobs if we don't convey that to the audience. So yes, for me personally, S5 II, you can see at the beginning of most episodes, if I don't have 2 cameras and I have the option to shoot it on the camera that we're reviewing, that is something I go to a lot because I enjoy using it. But this goes back to, we did get our start working at a camera store where our numbers are going to be atrocious if we're giving the wrong cameras to the wrong people all the time, right? And that's how we always try to look at these reviews as well. So it's really tough to find a camera that will disappoint everyone. That doesn't happen very often. And sure, we could certainly get more clicks initially if we said like, hey, this camera is hot trash and no one should buy it. But that's disingenuous. And that doesn't apply to any camera we've looked at in the last 2 years.
Longer. I would argue almost longer. There's almost no such thing as a bad mainline camera anymore. Sorry to interrupt you, Chris.
No, this is jumping ahead, and I'm going to steal your job here. But, another comment that we're going to talk about, Thomas.4110. He was basically saying when we did our Sigma 14mm nocturnal lens review that, Sigma has obviously prohibited everybody from comparing it to the Sony 18mm, or 14mm, which is ridiculous, and they're like, why isn't anybody comparing? It's like, you don't have these lenses sitting around in a war chest, right? Like, it's like, we got the Sigma, we go out to shoot, we're sticking to a schedule. We still talked about it compared to our findings with the Sony. If you read the article on PetaPixel, I go into a bit more detail on, what we can
read an article, Chris.
Read the article. I know, but it's just funny that like, we see this a lot where people make these assumptions that like, it's like the Abode thing, right? Like the corporate overlords are completely just like controlling us and telling us what to do. And as fun a narrative as that is, it's just not that exciting yet in the photo world. Maybe one day, I don't know.
One thing a lot of people don't understand is, yes, when we can, we will try and do comparisons to directly competitive products. We got a video coming out on Saturday where that's exactly what Chris and I did, looking at that new Tamron 11-20 is now available in X mount. So how does it compare to other lenses in that system? That was a case where we were able to get a directly competitive lens and compare the two together. But a 14mm 1.8 is a pretty niche lens. It's not something that's going to be kicking around my house. And I can't say like, hey, Sony, Sigma's got an embargoed lens coming out shortly. We'd really love to compare it to one of yours. Could you shuttle that down for us? When we can, we will. But also, we extensively tested that Sony 14mm. We know how the two of them track, and we still have our original images from that shot on the same resolution sensor. So Chris is making an informed comparison when he brings that up, even if we don't have the same chart shot with the two. And that's something you're going to see for a little while because, we have a new chart with PetaPixel now. Direct lens comparisons are going to be tougher to do for a bit, but our opinions and information are still based on actual testing we've done in the past.
So we haven't talked about this, but prior to you guys joining us, I told our reviewers, basically, when you're reviewing something, for the most part, I want you to review it on its own merits. if we're going to compare it, which you freely can in our, by the way, a full section called Are There Alternatives, which is required in all of our reviews. So we always compare. But a true comparison where we're actually shooting the same subject at the same time with two things that are together or more is called a comparison. It is a separate review process from the testing of a product for a review. Those are two separate things for us, at least on the written side. And for you guys, it often comes down to that too, because you really want to focus on the merits of a product you're reviewing, not everything else that could possibly compare to it when you're limited in your time with a product. That's just how things go. So like, yeah, we're not telling you not to do something ever. We're not telling you, your topics are up to you. What your opinions are up to you. And as you mentioned, I did not know what you were going to say about any of the stuff that you've reviewed so far until I saw your finished video. And I didn't tell you what you couldn't say at any point before that. Nope. We've never done that.
That's true. Jaron's trusting us, which is insane.
Yeah.
Well, and if you've enjoyed our show through the years, I mean, there is no change to the amount of editorial freedom. I mean, at the camera store, we worked for a store. We had far less there. And people are like, oh, I loved you back in the unbiased camera store days. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'd like to point out that until this point, you've always worked for a store. You've always worked for a company that is trying to sell stuff. We sell nothing here. We gain nothing by trying to sell you as many products as possible. We don't do that. And it's just funny to me. It made me really scratch my head. It's like, you do realize they work for Amazon, right? Like,
which again, we did not have Amazon telling us what to say about
you didn't.
product.
No, you didn't. And I'm not saying you did. I'm just saying, like, you've worked for stores before, but suddenly you're less editorial free when you leave that, according to some of our viewers.
Yeah, and they're wrong. So
yeah, there you go.
Okay. I'm glad we got that out. I don't know how many people will listen to this or believe anything that I've said, because, clearly I am here domineering over you even now through your minds, telling you what you can and can't say. But
you can't see it's not a shock collar Jaron's put on me for the podcast. It's like a little anklet, so it's safely out of frame. But yeah.
And he's holding my puppy. I have no idea where the puppy is. And as long as I do what I'm told, the puppy's safe. So
they're going to believe you. They're going to take this.
Actually, I think it's upstairs.
It's terrible.
Yeah, I know. It's sleeping upstairs.
All right. Before we get to never read the comments, you guys actually did want to talk about something that we're going to integrate into the beginning of our podcast from this point forward. We forgot on this one because it's a brand new thing, but I'm going to let you guys take it. Chris, why don't you? You wanted to just say stuff.
What have you been up to, Chris?
Oh, no, I didn't really do it. Jordan went on a fishing trip, and I was really excited to hear how that would go, because I have a vested interest in that. So Jordan, tell us about all I did. Look, I've been gardening. The pink theme. One of our commenters said, hey, you should do pink next. Pink.
I love it.
Beautiful peonies. Gardening. That's what I've been doing. And cleaning a trailer out, because we're getting ready to go camping.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, oh, I hope you enjoyed the break coming between DP Review to PetaPixel. And there's some stuff there that still isn't released. But I did not take a break during that period where we weren't releasing episodes for 3 weeks there. We've had, generally, I would do like a full episode and a short episode. We have been doing long episodes continuously, basically, since I started at PetaPixel, because there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and I want to shove as much of our faces down your throats as I possibly can.
And I like to talk. I like to talk a lot.
I took a few days off, and it was magical. So whenever one of the kids turns 8, my dad takes them on a fishing trip. We went and did that. We went to I forgot the name of the lake. Christina Lake.
Christina Lake.
Yeah, which was beautiful. We caught fish. Like I was saying to Chris before, I think I would have had just as much fun doing any other activity with my dad and son as fishing. I'm sorry, Chris. I had a great time, but I'm not going out fishing next weekend. This did not turn me into a lifelong fisherman. But one interesting thing, I wanted to travel light, and the forecast was terrible, so I actually brought a OM1 camera with me, and we might talk about that in the future. But
did I tell you to do that? Did I bear down on you to tell you to bring that?
I told them to do that because I love that.
No,
camera.
It
was me.
Was my own decision, because I've used those plenty for when I need really stable video, but I actually haven't used them a ton for photography. So I brought the little 75mm 1.8 because 135 is one of my favorite focal lengths that's underrepresented. This is very close. And the 8-25, which is the best focal length any lens has ever had. A 16 to 50 mil, you can do landscape with it,
Yeah.
portraits. I would love to see that in, more sensor formats. And I had a great time. I didn't feel like I was doing work, dragging around a lot of equipment. And I think it was a really fun kind of change of pace for me. So that's what I was up to. And now we're going to get right back. We're going to have a short midweek hiatus because I wasn't editing on that trip. And then we're back to it. We got a few episodes I'm working on right now.
Fantastic. Well, if
Jaron, what are you up to?
Oh, yeah. My sister-in-law was in town this past weekend. We went to the Japanese Gardens in Portland. I don't know if you've ever been to the Japanese Gardens in Portland. I think you have been to the
gorgeous.
Japanese Gardens. Yeah. I had never been to the tea house before.
Yeah.
So I went to the tea house with my family, and that was a wonderful experience.
That's cool.
I also really like the gift shop at the Japanese Gardens. I don't know. I'm a sucker for the stuff they've got in there. So
tell me the best thing in the gift shop. Money's no option.
Knives.
Object.
Really,
Knives,
it's knives. They actually import knives from a town in Japan that is specifically known for steelworking and has been known for that since the samurai period. So they were making swords and they transitioned to knives. And a lot of the time you'll see these knives with like the pound marks for like hitting the... Those are stamped in at a factory. Those aren't actual like hammer forging.
Hammer forged.
Yeah.
My
I know.
my stamp fancy knife is
Sorry, Jordan.
Often not real. These ones, if you look at each knife, the pattern is different. They are actually hitting these knives with their own hammers with their own hands. So they're really cool.
I have a Japanese knife. Chris, you have Japanese knives. We should do knife corner.
We should totally do knife corner. Yeah.
Tell people what we cut with our knives this week. That'd be great.
I use Fujiwara knives, and they are hand forged. And I love them. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff.
That's the best thing I thought there.
Yeah, Portland, that Japanese garden blew me away when my wife and I first saw it. It's stunningly beautiful. If you're in Portland, you have to see it. Like you have to. It rivals ones that I've seen in Japan themselves.
The other thing that's real close by, and it's free. Japanese gardens, you do have to pay to get in, but the rose gardens are free to just peruse. And right now they are blowing up. There are flowers all over it because it's rose season, and it is just very pretty.
Yeah, but it's not a Chris Nichols pink peony. I'll tell you that. Look at that.
I am a peony guy. My peonies are done.
Ant.
I have one that looks just like that, and they are done blooming. And we've reached the summer period where they prepare for next year. And I'm sad because they're my favorite flower. So
they're beautiful.
I do like that you've got those there. All right, that's what we've been up to. We're going to end this with never read the comments. And I've got a bunch here because there are so many wonderful comments that we need to go over. And actually, there's one I want you guys to address because there are a huge number of readers that have no idea what a noct is. Can you please explain what 1/4 of a noct of weight means?
Well, so the noct measurement was born in an alleyway in Seattle behind the Amazon offices when we got to play with a pre-production noct. And the first thing you notice is it's heavy. It's
pre-production
2 kilograms.
Like this is the Nikon lens, by the way.
Nikon
doesn't know.
50 millimeter. Yeah. 0.95 noct. 58 millimeter. Thank you, Jordan. 58 millimeter, 0.95 noct. And it's heavy, but it's exactly 2 kilograms. And I guess we just saw the measurement. Jaron, you could do the conversion for everybody.
I can.
Ounces. Yeah, in pounds and ounces. So exactly 2 kilograms, 2,000 grams. And I guess that just struck us because like, what a strange, perfectly even measurement. And we decided from then on, it's easy to do the math. It's easily divisible. So we're going to measure all our lenses that way.
And you don't just do that, by the way. You do actually provide real human measurements. It is 4.4 pounds, by the way, for those in
there you go.
Using Freedom units.
And I feel like it's become a real human unit of measurement, to be honest. I mean, at least on our show.
The thing that's great about it is almost no one has ever touched it. So it's only useful for you and I and maybe like another 30 photographers who have used that sucker. But it's established at this point. It's canon.
Yeah. So
see,
it's an inside joke. This is what basically this is.
It's an inside joke
explanation of.
We used to do like little bits with some of our videos back in the day, especially TCS TV days, where I would compare the weight of something to like a real, like this particular lens weighs the exact same as a human heart, or this particular lens weighs the exact same as 16,000, soldier ants, right, in a bag. Like we used to do that. We would like figure it out, but they were like, we might do that again. But I mean, the noct became universal. It's photographic, its subject matter is appropriate. I'm sure Nikon loves the hell out of that. And so there you go. Noct.
All
Or
right.
do they? Because every review we're reminding people how unwieldy their flagship lens
No, they
for
love
their
it.
Zen system is.
It's the most press that lens has ever gotten. It's wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you for answering that. Hopefully, those of you who
Yeah.
have no idea what an oct is now know what
Now
an
you do.
oct is.
2,000 grams.
We're going to go over some questions from each of the videos that have been published since the last time we talked. So, starting with last week's podcast from Jason Wines. Thank you, guys. I was informed and entertained. Jordan, your shot is how I wanted to look in my work meetings. Casual news guy. I've never seen it done to perfection like you did here outside of a studio. Now I can stop trying to figure it out. Well,
Can there's more to that, but I mean, we'll let Jordan talk. But the only thing that really upset me here was that it said he implied that Jordan set up my podcast camera, which is ridiculous. But
No, your skin tones would look
we
way
all know
nicer if I
Jordan
did
set
that.
up your podcast camera. And
Jordan
Jaron
did not set up my podcast camera. I set up my own podcast. It was
Jaron,
a lot
nice
of work.
to meet you. You look normal. Boy, I wish you knew. I'm glad I look normal. I appreciate that very much.
Wait till the truth comes out.
So, in
Isn't
short,
that all most of us want?
good
Just
job
be
to
normal.
both. Well, I don't know, probably not as much to Chris, but mostly good job, Jordan.
Yeah.
If people want to know what we're using here, I did list it in the comments, but I'm using the Amaran 200X, which is like a bicolor single point light, which I'm absolutely loving. And yeah, just beautiful skin tone, set everything to daylight balance. And this week I'm introducing a bounce board. I've got some white cardboard taped beside me here, so this eye is slightly more visible.
Awesome. All right. So questions. That was just a statement. I just wanted to share that because it's nice to have like a nice thing said.
I'm
once in a
deeply
while.
offended, though.
Oh, right.
Jason
Because you were
Weinstein's
not
not
specifically
deeply
told that
offended.
you looked good. Yes, I'm sorry.
Deeply offended.
I have from Treebeard. I have a PC and use Lightroom Classic stills, no video, and I'm wondering if a MacBook Air with 8 gigs of RAM will run it okay. Finding the new no noise brutally slow on my Dell laptop. Thanks. Any feedback, guys?
Oh, I totally would.
Yeah, my wife is using an M1 MacBook Air for Lightroom editing. And yeah, you'll definitely hit some scenarios if you're doing like raw processing for a bunch of images for a time lapse, for example, or, batch processing a bit of stuff out. You'll have to wait for a little while for those changes to be in effect. But for a normal workflow, it absolutely hums right through them.
I agree with that. It's any of the new Apple Silicon Macs will be so much better than what you're probably using right now. You should be fine. That new 15-inch Air, by the way, looks pretty sweet. I highly recommend it. I have not touched it, but the performance should be the same as on chips we've tested in the past, and those chips tested real well. So you should definitely consider it. Next question from some of these are so hard to say. Osseltum?
Sure.
I'd love to see a video covering your storage workflow. Do you always shoot videos direct in camera to SD or CF Express, or also use external recorders? Do you transfer footage to internal storage on your MacBook, or use an external USB drive for editing? And then once you've shot and edited an episode, what do you do with the original footage? Is it transferred somewhere else? Do you keep it? Do you even own tape? Do you keep a copy of the final edit or all the raw footage? What do you do? Jordan, this seems like a question.
This is for you, Jordan.
Yeah, absolutely. So generally I am shooting internally unless there's some format that can only be unlocked by external recording. Most shoots I do use a single SD card. If it's something I can never do again, like a recent documentary project, or like when we're on press trips, I do actually do backup recording. So in case a card fails, we've got something to fall back on then. I keep all the raw footage on while I'm working with a project. And if we might be comparing a new camera to something else, like a great example would be the ZVE1. I shot an episode on that. I held on to all the raw footage until we did our ZVE1 versus S5 IIX. So I was actually referring to the original footage for that. Or like the Z8, held on to all the initial review footage until we published our final review. But I don't hold on to original capture. It's a lesson I learned back at the Camera Store TV days. I was running like endless terabytes in a Mac Pro, hanging on to all my original footage. And the only time I ever went back to it was once we did a blooper reel at the end of the year, which wasn't even that good. So over time, I've learned...
Because we don't make bloopers. We're perfect. We're like...
Yeah.
We never screw up.
So when I finish a project, I do an H.264 master and a ProRes master, and I have a separate hard drive that I archive those on. But the raw footage goes away at a certain point. And I've never regretted that.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out that you generally will work with external SSDs as your main work drives, as opposed to migrating over to your hard drive. You use T7s, right?
Yeah, I've been
Fast,
using the
T7
Samsungs, which have been great. I don't really see a hiccup with those. With most of the file formats we're working with, the only one that's pushed them is 8K ProRes. There we were hitting, some dropped frames working with it, not because of processor issues, but just the amount of data it needed to access very, very quickly. So as that becomes more common, I might have to move to faster storage, but they'll probably update those SSDs as well in the future when I absolutely need that to happen.
Right on. Thank you. Next question is from Just Eric. This one's probably going to be for you, Chris. And this is referring to the Sigma 14 millimeter review. In the corner sharpness test, you said something like focusing specifically up here in the corner. Does that mean you refocused when testing the corners? Does it have a lot of field curvature?
Yeah, so actually this is a good question for all of our lens testing. So typically what we're going to do is we're going to test the center sharpness, widest aperture, and then stop down a couple stops. And then we specifically will focus in the corners as well. And it's for a few reasons. I mean, some lenses do exhibit field curvature where if you're focused in the center, your corners are going to be way off. Other lenses are what we'd say are quite flat field focusing, where focused in the center, your corners are still also relatively in focus. But we specifically just want to show, if you focus in the corner, what's that sharpness could be like. And particularly with ultra wide lenses, you have to remember with our chest chart, as large as it is, I'm really close. And in a lot of cases, especially ultra wide lenses, do have a lot of field curvature, and it wouldn't be fair to just shoot the center and say, look at the corners, they're blurry and soft. It's more so that they're just not within the same plane because of that curvature. And you wouldn't necessarily see that issue focusing landscapes or at infinity, right? So then we'll specifically focus in the corner. At the same time, it also is interesting to see, like that Sigma 14 mil was a really interesting lens because even up close, it actually didn't have much field curvature. Focusing in the center, the corners were very good, but it did actually have a strange ring just outside the center of softness. So it's as if the lens was sharp in the center, blurred around the edges of that, and then sharp again in the corners. So
the curvature is actually backwards is what's happening when we see that effect. So because it's not a matter of like the lens having field curvature, it's that physically the center of the chart is way closer than the corners. You wouldn't expect them to be sharp in that. So because the curvature is moving backwards, we're seeing the little ring where it's out of focus and then coming back into focus towards the corners there. Is that ever going to affect you practically? Only if you're shooting charts up close, which is why we don't highlight that as extensively as, say, if you're shooting something at a distance and it has extreme field curvature, that could be a real problem. You're shooting a group shot of people and the ones more towards the edge of the frame that are on the exact same plane are now slightly out of focus. That's where it can be more of an issue. So Chris and I kind of have a policy where if the field curvature is practically going to be an issue for you, we will discuss it. But the other thing is, it doesn't make sense to look at detail in the corner focused in the center. It made a lot more sense with SLRs because your focus points were clustered in the middle of the frame. With mirrorless cameras now, if I want to focus on something in the corner of the frame, I'll focus on it. I will put my focus point there. And that's what we're testing when we're putting our focus point in the corner of a test chart. That's the reason that we've decided to do that.
Very detailed answer. I'm sure he appreciates it. We're going to move on to the monopod review. And Jordan, I need you to know this. Did you know your shirt was wrinkled in that review?
I am aware. Chris pointed it out. I'm like, how bad is it? He's like, it's definitely noticeable. So I'm like, but you know what? I don't have a change of shirt, so we're just going to roll with it. And I will look less disheveled on my next review, guaranteed. Or I'm just never going to use like a nice collared shirt ever. It's exclusively t-shirts from this point out. Done with all of you. You've shamed me into wearing brand shirts.
Let's just say, we don't have to go into it, but it's not even close to the first time we've been physically shamed in some way. That's YouTube. That's the internet.
I don't want to go into that because I don't find it appropriate. Brutal. This one was in good fun though.
I think so.
So these are probably both going to be for you to answer, Jordan, because this is your baby.
What?
Well, unless Chris has some input. But so Alfred Vitsenza says, you would have to be out of your mind to place an expensive pro mirrorless camera and lens on that toothpick.
Oh.
We've been doing it for years. I mean, we had a a Sony F5 at the time was 16 grand when that thing came out, and we were sticking those on monopods because this is rated for 16 kilograms. The hydrostatic like locking ball one, and then the one with the pedal still 8 kilograms. I mean, that
16
is
kilograms is 35 pounds.
That's 4 knocks, right? Like it can handle 4 knocks.
See how useful this is?
Yeah.
8 kilograms is 17.6 pounds for those who don't do that. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, and I mean, it does depend on the head that you're going to put that equipment on as well. But yeah, I mean, certainly I wouldn't walk away from a giant cinema package. But with a high-end mirrorless camera, that's what this thing is designed to do, is to support them. And it has consistently for years. So I think that's definitely a viable use case, and I'll promote it that way.
T. Dalton says, so how would someone that's mostly a photographer, hobbyist, use this? I don't vlog. One thing that does come to mind is I will be photographing an older Union Pacific steam engine as it goes back to Cheyenne, Wyoming from Nebraska. I could set up my other camera to video it as it goes by, so I don't have to choose photo or video. So like, is that a viable use case of that? Or like, what
would still use a tripod. Like, I mean, Jordan makes a good point that you can walk away from these things, but we're never like placing them on a monopod with the legs and then like jetting far away, right? I mean, and for peace of mind, I don't know why you wouldn't use a tripod. And for photography, monopods, like they'd certainly be nice for telephoto lenses at a sports game to take the weight off, no doubt. But yeah, I would say it's more of a video thing. I love shooting video on a monopod because you actually get, how do you describe this, Jordan? Like you basically don't get movement. It looks locked off, but at the same time, sometimes it's got a little bit of subtlety to the movement. You can easily move the camera. And I kind of like that look. I like that kind of, it's a little bit of subtle movement, which can be a little bit more, I don't know, looks real, right?
Yeah.
Looks more dock.
With modern stabilization, especially the cameras that offer their like locked off mode, like Panasonic and Nikon offered this, it looks like you're on sticks. But then if Chris does decide to like walk away, or I want to reframe in the shot, it can look quite smooth and natural. I also mentioned my little trick when we're doing a walk and talk, I'll just find the center of gravity on the monopod, pinch it. You got sort of a steady cam look with, a lot of bounce still. It's not controlled like a gimbal, but certainly better than just hand holding the camera and walking with it in front of you. So they're very flexible for that. I don't see a huge use for photography, except for if you disassemble this into the low boy mode. It's the best time-lapse thing ever. Really great for product shots too. It's just incredibly stable, more so even than some of our good tripods. So I do use it for that. This is what I use when we do compositing, when it's me and my twin brother Gordon to peek behind the curtain. We need that locked off completely, and we actually do use the low boy mode or the hi-hat mode on this all the time for that.
Yeah, I'd agree. The only time I'd use a monopod for photography is at sporting events with a large lens. Yeah, and I use them a lot there. I really like them there, but that's basically it. It's pretty much a video tool. So thank you for clearing that up. And basically, the two main questions that were going to be the most prickly, we addressed earlier in the podcast, like as Chris said, he stole one from the Don't Read the Comments regarding how companies tell us we can't compare things, which is not true. And then also, how dare we report on that Abode software? But those were the other two things that we were going to talk about. So that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can support us by rating and reviewing the PetaPixel podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a 5 stars and told everyone why you like us. And on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, leave us some comments. We will go through them as we always read them all, and we put them on here. The other thing you can do also is on Spotify, you can actually send us a audio message. And yes, I will listen to these.
Oh no!
We'll see how this goes. There will be a link in the show description, and on Spotify you should see the option to do it. We've enabled it. I'll go through these next week, and if they are good, I'll even play them live.
Yeah.
We'll see. But thanks everyone for listening, and thanks again to our sponsor, OM Digital. We really appreciate that they continue to give us the ability to talk to you guys once a week. We will see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.